For decades, scientists assumed the problem was the hippos. They watched rivers in East Africa turn murky and oxygen-starved. They counted fish kills downstream of hippo pools. They measured the dung, 8,500 kilograms of partially digested plant material entering the Mara River every single day. The conclusion seemed obvious: remove the hippos, save the river. And in the 20th century, that is more or less what happened, not through a single decision, not through one dramatic removal, but through hunting, through habitat loss, through the slow encroachment of farmland onto the floodplains where hippos lived. Across Africa, hippo populations fell by somewhere between 50 and 90% in the span of a century. Rivers that had held hundreds of hippos now held dozens, some held none, and the rivers did not improve, they got worse. What followed forced scientists to revisit almost everything they thought they understood about how a hippopotamus fits into an African river, and why the animal they had spent decades trying to remove was in fact the one thing keeping those rivers alive. To understand what went wrong, you first have to understand what a hippopotamus actually does to a river, and it is not what most people expect. Most large animals in the African savanna eat grass and return what they consume back to the land. Their dung fertilizes the soil. The nutrients cycle through the grassland and stay there. This is how most people imagine the food web working, a closed loop on land for land. Hippos break that loop entirely. Every night, a hippo leaves the river and walks up to 3 kilometers into the savanna. It grazes. An adult consumes 30 to 40 kilograms of grass before dawn. Then it returns to the water to wallow, to cool, to sleep through the heat of the day. And as it does, digestion runs its course. The nutrients that were grass on land become dung in water. What fed the savanna now feeds the river. Across the Mara River in Kenya, 4,000 hippos repeat this cycle every 24 hours. 8,500 kilograms of organic matter enter the water every day. Researchers at the University of Antwerp called it an animal silicon pump. The name sounds technical. What it means is not. Every night when a hippo walks onto the savanna, it pulls silicon from the grass into its body. Every morning when it returns to the river, that silicon comes back with it, dissolved into the water, where microscopic algae called diatoms use it to grow. Those diatoms feed the insects feed the fish feed everything above them. The hippo is not just living in the river, it is feeding it, one animal at a time, one night at a time, across thousands of years. Remove the hippos, and that chain breaks at the first link, quietly, invisibly, long before anyone notices the fish are gone. But here is where the story gets genuinely complicated, because the hippos are also causing fish kills. Researchers from Yale University and the Carey Institute of Ecosystem Studies spent 3 years monitoring water chemistry downstream from 171 hippo pools along the Mara River. Their findings, published in Nature Communications in 2018, documented 55 high-flow events, moments when heavy rainfall pushed river flow to twice its normal rate. Dissolved oxygen declined in 49 of them. 13 dropped low enough to kill fish. 9 fish kills were documented over 5 years. The mechanism is direct. When hippos concentrate in pools during the dry season, dung accumulates at the bottom. When rains arrive and flush that organic matter downstream, it decomposes rapidly. Decomposition consumes oxygen. The river suffocates. Fish die. So the hippo is simultaneously the nutrient engine that feeds the river and the source of periodic catastrophe within it. This was the finding that stopped ecologists cold. It was not because it was paradoxical, but because it forced a reckoning with what happens to that picture when the hippo is removed. A river without hippos stops receiving 8,500 kilograms of organic matter per day. The fish kills stop, the water clears, everything looks better, but the food web has lost its engine. Without silicon, the diatoms thin out, and the algae that move in to replace them are a different kind entirely. The kind that blooms green across the surface, consumes the oxygen below, and poisons what it touches. Not dramatically, not in a single event you can photograph and put on the news. Just steadily, season by season, the water becomes something that fewer and fewer things can live in. The fish kills were visible. This is not. That is what makes it dangerous. In Lake Victoria, into which the Mara River flows, silicon availability is already declining. The lake's phytoplankton community has already shifted in that direction. Researchers at the University of Antwerp estimate that if hippo populations continue to fall at current rates, the silicon supply to Lake Victoria will reach critical levels within decades. The food web built on those algae, the tilapia, the Nile perch, and the hundreds of species that support the livelihoods of millions of people around the lake will follow. This is what the fish kills were hiding. They were real. The oxygen crashes were real. The dead fish floating downstream were real, but they were not evidence of a broken system. They were evidence of a system functioning exactly as it had for thousands of years. A system in which large, violent pulses of organic matter were a natural feature of tropical rivers with intact wildlife populations, not a malfunction to be corrected. The researchers at Yale put it plainly. Generations of scientists had studied rivers that no longer had large wildlife in them and mistaken the absence for normality. The Mara River was not unusual. It was what most African rivers used to look like before the animals were removed, and most of those rivers have been getting steadily worse ever since. Before the commercial hunting of the 19th century and the agricultural expansion of the 20th, hippopotamus populations occupied nearly every major river system across sub-Saharan Africa. From the Niger Delta to the Zambezi, from the rivers of Senegal to the lakes of the East African Rift, hippos were moving nutrients from land to water in quantities that shaped aquatic food webs across an entire continent. Hippo populations fell by between 7% and 20% in the period from 1996 to 2004 alone. Models suggest a further 30% decline over the coming generations. In rivers that have already lost them, the nutrient transfer is already broken. The silicon pump has already stopped. The fish kills that drove culling programs in the 20th century were not a reason to remove hippos from rivers. They were the fee the river charged for services it could not deliver any other way. The periodic oxygen crash, the dead fish on the bank, the murky water after heavy rain. These were not signs that the hippo did not belong. They were signs that it did. What this means for conservation is straightforward, even if the politics are not. Hippos are not a problem to be managed out of African rivers. They are the mechanism by which African rivers feed themselves and by which lakes downstream, some of the most biodiverse and most densely populated freshwater systems on Earth, receive the nutrients they cannot generate on their own. Remove the hippos and the fish kills stop. The water clears, the rivers look cleaner by every superficial measure, and then slowly and irreversibly, the food web collapses. The lesson of the Mara River is not that the science was wrong. The data on fish kills was accurate. The oxygen measurements were real. The problem was that those measurements captured only one part of what the hippo was doing, the visible, dramatic, easy to photograph part. The rest of it, the silicon, the diatoms, the food chain built across decades of dung, was invisible until it started to disappear. Scientists have spent decades learning to see the full picture of what a large animal does to an ecosystem. In most African rivers, they are completing that picture just in time to watch the animal disappear. The hippo was never the problem. It was the answer to a question the river had been asking for 10,000 years. And in most places, we stopped it from answering before we understood what was being asked. If that kind of story is what you come here for, subscribing takes 2 seconds. It helps more than you think.